Good afternoon, I'm Abe.
And I'm Frank. And today, we're adumbrating the second half of Chapter 20, Girding for War, the North and the South, in Kennedy, Cohen, and Bailey's The American Pageant textbook. Abe, who's our guest?
Once again, we have an AP teacher with us, Professor Clay. Mr. Clay, you have the honor.
Very good. The Confederates ordered 2 Laird rams, aka Scorpion-class ironclads. These ships were some of the most powerful on the seas. Armed with rams and heavy caliber guns, they would have turned the tide of the war. Fortunately, the British realized that if they sold the ships to the South, it would be tantamount to war, and canceled the sale. The Confederates also directed attacks against the North from Canada, inciting counterattacks from Irish Americans. In order to bolster Canada's defense, the British created the Dominion of Canada in 1867. To the south of the South, Napoleon III invaded Mexico, installing Maximilian as dictator. He did so at this time because he felt that America, unable to enforce their Monroe Doctrine, would be unable to stop them. However, this French control was short-lived, since after the Civil War, America demanded France abandon its Mexican ambitions. Back to Frank. Can you inform us about the political issues facing the North and the South?
Absolutely, Professor Clay. The South had a fundamental problem. Since every state was deeply committed to states' rights, many states were reluctant to share troops and equipment, since each state simply wanted to help itself. Another problem was the unpopularity of Jefferson Davis, the South's leader, who simply wasn't up to the task of controlling the southern sea of seditious secession. On the other hand, Lincoln was patient and adaptable, and enjoyed the advantage from having an established form of government, unlike the South, who started from scratch. But Abe, was the North forced to cut back on traditional liberties?
Sadly, it was. Lincoln, branded a simple Susan tyrant, did impose some tyrannical policies since Congress was not in session when war broke out. But these policies were actually generally accepted by Congress. So let's talk about the specifics. First, Lincoln proclaimed a blockade. Second, he increased the size of the army. Third, he authorized advancing $2 million to 3 private citizens for military assistance. Fourth, Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus. Fifth, in the border states, Lincoln instituted supervised voting to almost control the elections. And sixth, certain newspapers were suspended. But in the South, states' rights advocates prevented Jefferson Davis from exercising arbitrary power, as Lincoln was sort of doing. Some carriage companies ultimately prevented the completion of a military essential railroad for fear that it would hinder their own businesses. All right, Mr. Clay, what kinds of people made up the armies of the North and the South?
Initially, Northern armies were entirely comprised of volunteers. But in 1863, Congress passed the first ever U.S. conscription law. The draft was most hated in the Democratic hotbeds of the North, notably New York City. So the New York draft riots broke out as many Irish Americans rampaged and pillaged the city. All in all, around 90% of Union soldiers were volunteers, since patriotic pressures to enlist were intense. But as healthy men became scarcer, enlistment bounties were offered. With these enlistment bounties, bounty brokers emerged who induced Americans and immigrants alike to enlist. The South, however, was much less populous and therefore ran out of manpower much more quickly. Consequently, the South imposed conscription in 1862, a year earlier than the North, the Union. Even worse, many slave owners were exempted from the draft, and thus many of the less prosperous grew indignant. Frank, did the war cause economic adversity in the North and the South?
Of course it did. In the North, they had to resort to new economic tools in order to keep their economy stable during the war. and these included the first ever income tax, also the Morrill Tariff Acts, which raised import taxes from 5 to 10%. Additionally, they started beginning to issue the greenback, or simple paper money, which allowed the US government to create more funding. And finally, the national banking system, which allowed banks to join together to purchase government bonds or even issue their own paper money. All these measures allowed the North to maintain the relatively low inflation rate of 80%. Now I say relatively low because in the South, they suffered an inflation rate of 9,000%. But Abe, bearing that in mind, did the North discover economic benefits from the war?
Yes, the Northern economy evolved both during and after the Civil War in several ways. First, many new factories were constructed. Unfortunately, however, much of the working class in these factories was hurt by soaring prices resulting from inflation. Second, a millionaire class emerged. Third, Yankee profiteers emerged and deceived American citizens with low-quality products. Fourth, standard clothing sizes began to replace custom-tailored clothing. Fifth, the new mechanical design reapers allowed for great surpluses of grain that eventually helped to overthrow the cotton economy. Sixth, a new industry of petroleum developed. The only major industry in the North during the entire war that was damaged was the ocean-carrying trade. Seventh, pioneers pushed farther and farther west as a result of the Homestead Act, which promised free land to settlers. And eighth, new opportunities opened for women who often became government and factory workers, and women overall assisted in the war effort. The first female physician, Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, organized the U.S. Sanitary Commission to train nurses, equip hospitals, and collect medical supplies. Clara Barton and Dorothy Dix helped to pioneer women into the nursing profession. And Sally Tompkins managed an infirmary to treat Confederate soldiers. Overall, the North emerged more prosperous after the war than it had ever been. Alright, Mr. Clay, how drastically did the Civil War devastate the South?
The bottom line of the Civil War, at least economically, was that the South got smashed. Whereas in 1860 the South controlled 30% of America's wealth, after the war they controlled a mere 12%. In the wake of the Southern defeat, Northern capitalists were able to bring a full-on industrial revolution to the South, in an area that had previously been fully dependent on agriculture alone. In conclusion, this chapter serves to show the adversities that both sides of the Civil War would face in the years to come, without actually getting to the details of the fighting. We saw that the U.S. would face threats not only from the Confederates, but also from the British, in the shape of warship sales and internally in the shape of the New York draft riots. Yet in the end, the North won out, leading to a more industrial and truly united states.
Thank you for watching. Please like
and comment
and subscribe. And we'll catch you guys next time in Chapter 21.